seeing her dad in the hospital bed, just trying to say one word was such a struggle, to the point where he couldn't say anything. Seeing him like that, just there. It's odd because I was really robbed of a father figure in 3rd grade in a lot of ways.
Welcome to Lost and Found. On today's episode, we have actor Cabot Baston. What Cabot says in this episode is so important on so many levels, and I really hope it helps you on your journey. Thank you for watching. Thank you so much for being here, Cabot. I really appreciate it.
Of course.
So you have experienced a good amount of loss. You lost your dad in 2003 and your grandmother in 2022. You were young during your dad.
Yeah. I guess really, if we want to talk loss and grief, we actually have to rewind it further back. So my dad was number 5. Number 1 was 1996. That was the death of my great-grandmother. So she was the first time I ever experienced loss.
How old were you then?
I was either late 5 or early 6. So very, very young. She went in for just a routine hip replacement, and she never came out.
Really?
Yeah. She died due to hospital negligence. A nurse not reading her chart, giving her solid food when it clearly said not to. A doctor put in a feeding tube in the lining of her stomach instead of her stomach itself. I still remember just weeping. A lot of time spent at the hospital. We transferred her from the one to another, but the hospital she eventually died at, they actually broke the rules a little bit and let me into the ICU, because normally, I don't know if it's 18, it's not a 5 or 6 year old. They're not allowed to be back there. That image is still there. She was so, in the bed, hooked up to so many tubes and wires. She was so swollen. I remember her hands were like, it looked like twice the size they should have been, because she was not a large lady. She was 86, perfectly healthy aside from the knee and new hip. And I still remember I was at my other grandmother, my dad's mom. My parents came to pick me up. They told me, and I think I wept for 2 days. I remember being at my grandma's house on her sofa and just still face buried down in it. Our preacher's wife, called her Mimi, she came over, she made me laugh. That was the first time I think I stopped crying in those 2 days.
Being that young, it sounds like you fully understood what happened.
The way I rationalized it was, they're gone and they're not coming back. It's very simple but very effective. I still remember her funeral service. To this day, I have a very hard time with the song Amazing Grace. That was her favorite song. I just remember wanting it to not be true, and the choir continually with all 4 verses. So there is that connection that I have, which has dissipated a lot through the years. Then after her, it was my dad's mom. I called her Nanny. We had a very different relationship than my grandmother. Then my Aunt Donna. She essentially smoked herself to death. So those 3, it all kind of culminated in April 2003 when my dad died. And he was number 5 in 6 years.
That's so much.
Yeah, it's a lot. Death and I are old friends in a weird way. I grew up around a lot of death. It's a weird thing because I think about death a lot. I don't know if that's where a bit of my morbidity came from. So with my dad was very artistic. I get a lot of that from him. He had a really, really good voice. He was a great tenor. He sang in church a lot. Some things are what I remember. Some things are stories from my mom. She remembers he came to her one day and was like, "Vicky, I think I had a stroke." All of a sudden, he wasn't able to do vocally what he was used to. His upper register, he just lost access to. Went to the doctor. Everything was fine on that end. We had to go to Charlotte to a specialist, I guess a neurologist. They had to test for 23 different diseases that mimic what he had. They had to rule everything out first before they could give the final diagnosis of ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease. What that is, it's MS and MD put together. So it attacks your muscular system and your nervous system simultaneously. There is no cure. It is 100% fatal. There's upper and lower based on which it affects first. He had the upper. People who have the lower are confined to a wheelchair sooner. People with upper lose their voice first. His voice and his ability to speak went away much quicker than his ability to walk. Eventually it went from being able to walk to assistance to a walker to a wheelchair, eventually to a complete invalid is what you end with. He used to describe it as being a prisoner in your own body because it doesn't attack your mind. That's the most insidious part. You're as sharp as you ever were. Cognitively, you're fine. It's your nervous system, so the control of your body. You're hyper aware of everything that is happening. He was in hospice for 18 months. Started with a nurse coming in to keep him while my mom was at work. She had a child, so she was still having to teach. Eventually, when it got to a certain point, then he went to the hospice home, and that's where he was for 18 months. My mom was there 6 days a week. His favorite thing in the world was food. People still talk about this today. When you went out to eat with him, no one had to-go boxes because he would eat your food. He would inhale food. You could also see him as fast as he ate. He also savored every single bite. It got to the point where my mom would go to hospice and she would spend 2 hours feeding him. Back in college, when I had friends, he was asking me if I believed in true love, and I said, yeah. He said, well, how do you know? I'm like, I saw it. My mom truly showed what that looked like. It's a choice. It's an action verb. Staying by him through all of that. That also was a very dark time for me as well. I spent a lot of time between 4th to 6th grade by myself as a fellow only child. My mom didn't force me to go to hospice. Sometimes she did. But, I remember every day after school, and I think this is a bit of the guilt I bear. Far more often than not, I said no. Seeing her dad in the hospital bed, just trying to say one word was such a struggle, to the point where he couldn't say anything. Seeing him like that, just there. It's odd because I was really robbed of a father figure in 3rd grade in a lot of ways. I remember one of my high school teachers taught me how to shave. There's so many things that so many little boys get to learn and experience that I never did. At least from my dad. It's also strange. A friend of mine, he lost his dad rather unexpectedly 4 years ago. I was one of the first people he reached out to because of my own experiences. I told him, I think the difference is you mourn the loss of what you had. I mourn the loss of what could have been. It's the growing up without a dad. It's all those little things that boys learn through their lives from a father. My mom and grandma did so much. And I don't know if it's because it was such a long process or if it's because he was number 5. I adopted maybe one of the more unhealthy coping mechanisms, which is dissociation. I'm very good at dissociating and just kind of shutting down. Just within the past few years, I've kind of broken through some emotional barriers of my own. I didn't cry at my dad's funeral. My behavior was kind of strange, and people have commented on that since then, which I get, because I think to an outside observer, I probably seemed very unbothered. I think it took a few months, maybe longer, for it to finally hit. The weeping came in private, whether it was in the shower. One of my most cherished possessions is when my dad first got his diagnosis and knew what was happening. Someone offered studio recording time. So I have a CD of him singing, and it's 2-sided. Some were also old recordings from church. Some were from there, mixed and mastered into a CD. I remember middle school, high school, just in the bathroom, like in the shower, even after a shower, just like being in the bathroom for ungodly amounts of time, like 2 hours in the bathroom. And I would bring my boombox in there with me, and I would play his CD, sing along with it, cry with it. For a long time, I was far more private about grief and sorrow.
When he got his diagnosis, you said it was about 3 years. You said you didn't go to hospice a lot, but did that affect you in any way during that time?
Oh, yeah. I don't know if I fully understood the gravity right away. It didn't take that long because you could see the fairly rapid decline. I didn't spend nearly enough time over there. I mean, my mom, what an impossible decision. What do? Do you force your child to go sit with his invalid father, or do you not push it? And she found a balance. I think about her position in the whole thing is the impossible position. I spent a lot of time just by myself at the house, watching insane amounts of TV. TV was my escape in so many ways. I have a fairly unhealthy relationship with television. And coupling that with being the new kid in 4th grade, so much happening at once. Feeling like an outsider at this new school. Hating what I saw in the mirror every single day. And then my dad slowly dying. It was a lot. It was a lot for a child. It was a whole lot for a child.
I mean, I could imagine you just not wanting it right in your face, especially at that age. I don't think I would have understood. We don't understand mortality really at that age.
I think in some ways, school was such a blessing as well, because it's a way, one, for my parents, I'm somewhere. Then for me, it's also a way that forces me out of the house, forces me to be around other kids. I would rated an overall positive, especially as an only child who's dealing with it by himself, kind of, not really, but like you said, a 5th or 6th grader versus my mom, very different. Even, me right now, very different. Back in 1996, my dad, because my grandma and great-grandma just lived 2 minutes down the street. He convinced my grandma, he was like, listen, why don't you guys sell the house, put your money into ours to remodel, make it bigger, and you guys just move in with us? Because he's like, as long as I live, neither one of you will ever go to a nursing home. So he's like, just move in with us, and that way we'll all just be together. He had a great, great love for my mom's family, and they likewise. The irony, the tragedy, is that my great-grandmother died before the house was completed. I call my great-grandma Gigi for great-grandma. Gigi loved light, hated darkness. So the back bedroom that they had added on had just a whole wall of nothing but windows. So it was so bright in there, and then she never got to see it. I think my dad only really got to live in the house a few years, but the last year and a half, he was confined to a recliner because getting in and out of a bed was so difficult. Some friends of my parents had a recent loss, and they had one of those electric recliners where you just hit the button. So it goes all the way back and then goes all the way up and then lifts. So it actually the back comes up, which gave him that boost so my mom could help him get up, or he could get to the walker. And I remember overall he kept just such a positive disposition, which blew people's mind. I remember one time he got very angry, I think just in general, and he did headbutt my mom and called her a bitch. But we give him grace for that because he was dying. So you get a little pass. That's really the only time I really, really remember him having any sort of rotten attitude to the whole thing, which is remarkable. He was the most popular person at hospice. He had nicknames for all the nurses. One of the nurses painted his toenails while he was asleep one day. They had that relationship. So basically the disease ends is you slowly lose control of all of your motor functions to the point where if you live long enough, you will strangle on your own saliva. So the last 3 days or so, they were just pumping him full of morphine. So he died very peacefully. Because at that point, again, there's no cure, so that's really all you can do. I remember the last few days, my mom was adamant about me being there. We had a bunch of people from church and family all over there. I was actively dissociating a lot during that whole thing. And then, the funeral, I remember bits and pieces of it. And then he was number 5. Then I had a break from death.
When did you really start processing his?
It took a few months, and it was mostly
You said private.
in private. A lot of in the bathroom, and a lot of in my bed before, lying in my pillow before going to sleep. Those are 2 of the big places. I think about my mom and just how strong she was during the whole thing. She didn't necessarily hide her grief, but she definitely hid the severity of it and the depth of it, which I think was the right move to do, especially for a child so young. I don't think I ever saw her break down, but I have zero doubt that she did. I can only imagine. And I know a bit more of it since being an adult and conversations with her, but I can only imagine the depths of despair. Every August, she'll either call or text me on their anniversary. She still counts the years.
Do you have anything you do on milestones for your dad?
Not really. It's a weird thing. Like I said, I think it's the loss of what could have been. Regret's a weird word, right? Because it's not anything of my own doing. But I guess the regrets, the sorrows, I don't know what the word is for it. But never knowing him as an adult. I lost that relationship in a lot of ways, somewhere in 4th grade. That young, you're still building these relationships with your parents. And then when one parent is no longer able to verbally communicate, especially that young, there are certain things that don't quite make sense, or connections you can't quite make. It makes me sad that my dad didn't get to see me graduate high school or become a theater major. So my dad, he never really pursued the arts. My mom always said it was because he never really got very much encouragement for it growing up, which is so important, where I was highly encouraged. Pursuing the arts, he never got to see. He never got to see me be an adult. So many things. Having your dad give you the sex talk. Just a lot of those little things I think little boys take for granted that I was robbed of in so many ways. He was 50 when he died. I remember his last birthday, his 50th, we had at hospice in 2002. Then April the next year, he died. So yeah, my dad was only 50 years old.
Whenever all the things that you wished or still wish you could have from your dad, did you ever find yourself being jealous of people that had that? Because I do. When I see my friends with their mom, I get highly jealous about it.
In some ways I do. In some ways I think there is an envy there about, why didn't I get to experience this kind of thing? But I also think because it was such a long, slow process as well, it just kind of became normal in a lot of ways. I remember when I turned 24, I had the thought that my dad's been dead for half my life. And now I've lived my life longer without him than I did with him. I think in some ways it eases my own pain because it was so long ago and I was so young. I think in some ways it's easier to mourn the loss of what could have been than the loss of what was. Because sure, would I have loved to experience those things, and my dad experienced those things? Yes, but I also don't really have a frame of reference what that would have been like. Maybe you're kind of like me. I don't fully understand sibling relationships because I don't have a frame of reference. I have very close friends that I love, but I don't fully understand that sort of bond with a brother or a sister that you're 2 years apart, 4 years apart, and you live together. I never had that. So it's I don't know what it's like to grow up with a father. There are several men from church, one of my male teachers in high school, who all kind of stepped up to the plate in ways. Some of them who never had either sons or never had kids. Like my teacher in high school, to this day, is still a bachelor. So, he's never had children, which is why he takes a lot of time with his kids, with the students. And then in so many ways, when I really think about myself, I truly see myself as someone who had 3 parents. My grandma, Mama, she did move in with us. It's been the 3 of us since my dad died in 2003. My mom and grandma only 19 years apart. Being a little bitty thing, staying with my grandma at the beauty shop, and Mama and Gigi both, staying with them at the beauty shop. She had these 2 blue wooden benches, and they would put them together to basically make a little bed. Because they're long benches, so almost like a big old crib for me. When I was 2 and 3, before I started going to school, my mom would drop me off at the shop, and then she would go teach at school. My dad would go to work, and I would be there. I'd wake up in my little makeshift crib, and I'd have all the, little old ladies. My grandma owned her own shop, and she worked there Wednesday through Saturday. Always Sundays off. Tuesdays were supposed to be her day off, but Lord, trying to get her to take a day off was like pulling teeth. Growing up, I was always so jealous of my friends who talked about taking a week vacation during the summer. I never did. The longest we ever did was maybe 4 nights. And that was like a long vacation. My grandma would not stay away from work that long. Anyway, so when I was a little bitty thing, my Aunt Diane was the activities director at Hoffield's nursing home. She convinced my grandma to come in to work on Tuesdays at the salon there in the nursing home. A wild story that I never even knew until I was probably in college. So all growing up, I knew this little old lady named Frances. So Frances lived at that nursing home. She was like my grandma's little helper at the beauty shop. So Frances would do the laundry, sweep around. I always knew Frances as this feisty little old lady. Frances used to be this just very reclusive, completely shut out old lady at the nursing home who had no friends, barely spoke. And my Aunt Diane went to my grandma and she was like, "What? Would you be interested in maybe a little helper?" And Mama was like, "Sure." And when I heard the stories of how Frances used to be before she met my I was like, what? Unrecognizable.
And then she met your grandmother.
I think what it was that she found a new purpose, going to the beauty shop, being around all these other little old ladies her own age and having something to do.
Right.
A lot of my grandma's customers were from the nursing home. They would take me as a little 1-year-old with my grandma to the nursing home, and I'd be in my little playpen, and the little old ladies would come over, and I was basically baby therapy. My mom said I was talking in full sentences, and I knew my shapes, colors, and numbers when I was 18 months. Yeah.
That's impressive.
And I think it's because I was around adults all the time. I wasn't around goo goo gaga. I was getting that gossip. We were just talking. I was like, okay, why do I know everything about everyone and her sister?
Right. Your mama being your 3rd parent and you living with her from when you were very young, how did that different from your father?
The thing with Mama was that she was technically the 3rd person to meet me. After my mom and dad, who met me at the same time, it's a very different thing because I have no frame of reference for life without her. I lived 2 minutes down the street, so I was over there all of the time. Spent the night over there all the time, at the beauty shop. I mean, truth be told, I probably spent more time with her than I did with my dad, honestly. And then I think my greatest regret is being as mean as I was sometimes, where she was just a person of pure love. And I think between my very volatile temper that I've worked a very long time to maintain, and perhaps everything with my dad, perhaps that was the outlet. Maybe my real reaction was rage and just not knowing where any of it really came from. Not that we didn't have very many loving, tender moments, of course, but I was not an easy child by any stretch of the imagination. I don't know how I survived. I don't think I would have survived me if I was my own parent. I was kind of a monster. No, it was really bad. It was really bad. It was really awful. Regrets. But grace cuts children. My room was here. Directly beside mine was the living room. And right here was her room. I remember all through even through college, after college, when I would come home, we were very much a sleep with the door open family. I had this like old iron train doorstop that was always at my door. Like my door never shut. It's not like one of those families you're not allowed to shut your door. I just never did. Mama would always sneak in at like 2 or 3 in the morning just to make sure I was breathing. She'd always give me a kiss and she'd always say, "You my darling." In her late 70s is when we started seeing a few signs, a little bit more forgetful about certain things. And then when she turned 80, she's at a different location. It was a bit more narrow. And she was going to the back to go to the bathroom. And her foot got caught on the leg of one of those blue benches. And she tripped and she fell. And then she couldn't get up. So her customer, Barbara, called the ambulance, came, found she broke her hip. We were back there with her. It was just like stream of consciousness. Just non-stop, just motor mouth. Just brrrr. Talking about anything to anyone or just to the ether. And that's how she would cope with the pain. Then she had to be out of work. She's an 80-year-old lady who broke her hip. My mom took a very realistic, because she's always been the most practical one, very realistic look at the books. The thing about beauty shops is that our customers loyal, kind of. But if you're gone for that long, you're going to lose quite a few. And then it just kind of became too taxing on my mom because because Mama wasn't able to drive, so she lost her license. She hated to sit still. She hated to be home. She didn't care where she was. She loved to be away because I think it made her feel busy. And she hated to be idle. So even around the house, she used to be piddling around like, "What are you doing?" She hated TV, except for like, if we wanted her to laugh, we'd put in Doris Day or Shirley Temple, and she would cackle. She would just cackle. It was the funniest thing. When her license got revoked, that was a really big blow to her. My mom took a really good look at the books. It was just one of those things, because picking up customers and taking them back, that was just a free service. That was just something she did. And my mom was like, "I can't be doing this anymore." And so she's like, if we stop doing the shuttle. It was like multiple nursing homes too. So she's like, realistically, you really only have enough customers for like maybe 3 days. Then rent going up. It was just one of those things where it's like, you'd probably be breaking even. So the beauty shop closed, and I think that was when cognitively she really started declining, because you lose that schedule, and she did not do well with retirement. She hated it. I remember there were some nights, because for whatever reason, Alzheimer's is worse at night. My mom, Aunt Diane, and I would be watching something, because again, she hated TV. She'd like come in the room, and she's like, "Vicky, who do I have tomorrow at the shop?" Got to the point where if you were to have breakfast with the three of us, she'd probably ask you the same question who knows how many times. A steady and fairly rapid cognitive decline, which was really hard to see, which I didn't have to live with, because, you know, I was in Atlanta, there in North Carolina. So I can only imagine what it's like for my mom being her primary caregiver. It was so strange, because my grandma was a woman born way out in the sticks in North Carolina in 1933, who became a business owner, who survived a physically, verbally abusive husband, who came out on the other side of that. Such a strong, resilient person. Alzheimer's truly robs you of your dignity, I think, more than anything else. I remember Christmas 2021 was when you got COVID. So I was like, okay, well, I'll just stay in North Carolina for like, I think I stayed like an extra week or something, you know? I'm just so grateful, because little did I know that would be the last time I saw her. February 2nd, my mom called me and she was like, "Cabot, you need to figure out when you're going to come down. The doctor's here right now. Found a doctor at his house calls. And Mama probably only has about a week." And I was like, okay. I remember I was in my room, like, getting stuff together, packing, and then very shortly thereafter, and I still remember my mom's voice on the phone telling me that she was dead. I think it was like 20 minutes between the phone calls.
I remember it wasn't long because we spoke in between. You were trying to plan when you were going, and I remember being like, I think you should go, because something similar had happened with my grandmother. I was like, I think you should go because you don't know. I remember hearing you in your bedroom. I didn't realize you were packing.
Yeah, I was already starting to pack because I was going to go the next day, and I always remember, as soon as I opened my bedroom door, you were standing right there, and you just embraced me and held me. I was just reeling, and my friend Scarlett called me, and she was like, I'll come down to Atlanta and pick you up. I'm like, okay. And I remember I was over at my friend Amy's house, and she and her husband overheard me on the phone. They're like, there's no reason for your friend to come all the way from North Carolina to Atlanta. She's like, we'll just drive you. So they drove me up to North Carolina because I can't do that. I can't drive 5 hours by myself. They spent the night with us. I remember going with my mom to the funeral home, and I did not want to go in there. But I think I really did it for my mom. And I remember when I saw her body there, that's when I really just broke down. Because there is something about once you see the body, it becomes far more real. Yes, it becomes real.
And it's wild because in my experience, it looked like my mom, but it didn't. You know, like you could tell something was missing, but my brain was like, no, we'll just stay right here as long as we can. It
was so interesting to me because it was never lost on me that that Mama was a very pretty lady. She was always the type who, her makeup would be done, her hair would be fixed to go to the mailbox. She didn't even go to the mailbox without making sure she was looking okay. Even at the beach, she was always looking right. Now, that was one of the things with the Alzheimer's. She was so cute. But I remember seeing her in that casket for the first time in probably 6 years with her hair and makeup done. And in so many ways, it felt like I was seeing her for the first time in a long time. I had almost forgotten just the true beauty that she was. And I was like, oh my goodness. That's a really weird kind of thing. My mom had a very similar thought as well, because that's truly who she was and how we knew her. Before the Alzheimer's really hit, like 82, 83, something like that. No. you would not catch her without, her hair and makeup done. And it just kind of maybe longed for her a little bit more. And what's really bizarre, far more than my dad, that's when I felt like I lost a parent. Because she's the one that raised me. She's the one who was there for my high school graduation. She was there for my college graduation. She was there in every milestone of my life. She was my constant. And I still catch myself sometimes looking through camera roll or whatever it is. I still find myself sometimes just being like, it isn't right. She wasn't supposed to die, because what's life without her? I don't know. Yeah, she's, from the day I was born until the day she died, she was every bit as constant as my own in my life. It's strange.
How do you feel that losing her has changed you, or has it?
I don't know. It's that odd thing of when you go through something like that, for you it feels like your world has stopped, and it feels like the world should, but time moves. Time always moves forward. Having so much time between number 5 and number 6, I'd almost forgotten what it felt like. And I was like, all right. But then my first death as an adult, too. But in a weird way, it almost felt familiar again. I remember having those feelings like, oh, right, you're back. I haven't seen you in a while, have I, death? Maybe eased it? I mean, there was a day just last week. I was in the kitchen doing something, and it just hit. And you just feel it. And I just have to kind of stop and allow myself to feel that wave of grief. And then it passes. And then I move on. I think the important thing is when that wave hits, I think it's so much better to write it than to fight it. But yeah, when it hits, and it hits just randomly, I'll just have to stop, just take a physical pause and let it come. Might as well. Sometimes you just fill up, sometimes they spill over, and then it'll pass. Makes me appreciate my mom even more, because she's not young. She's very young in heart, and she's very young spirited. Biologically, she's not young. It's in the back of my mind that Mama wasn't the first one with Alzheimer's. On her side of the family, it tends to skip a generation, but I don't know how many men have had it. I think it's usually women every other generation. It's all those things in the back of my mind, just like with my dad's ALS. Is it genetic? Well, they don't know. I don't really know. And it's something that is in the back of my mind every once in a while that pops up.
This last Christmas when you were down or up, did y'all have any rituals that you did for your mama or in her memory?
Last year at Christmas was very low-key, very, very chill. Maybe we held each other a bit tighter. Her absence was felt. My mom was definitely the one to comment on it. My mom knew her mother for almost 70 years. Constant companion. Always right there. Whether it's looking into the bedroom at the spot where she was, or the specific place on the couch where she'd always sit. One of my grandma's nurses made her this. My mom and grandma both love pink. Favorite color. So she had her this little back pillow. And my mom has 2 cats now. They just turned a year old in April. The female cat, she'll make little biscuits, but she only does it on one pillow, and that's the one. And her favorite place to sit and curl up is exactly where my grandma would sit. And Mom will die before my mom got the cats. It's just little things like that, And perhaps I do still dissociate a bit. I probably do. I didn't so much when it happened, when my dad died. I think the dissociation was so I could just take it in pieces through time. This one I felt everything. This one hit me like a truck. I spoke at her funeral. Kind of like with your mom's, instead of wearing black, we had everyone wear pink. So, and my mom got her a pink casket.
My mom had a pink casket. It was like a baby pink.
That's what ours was too, yeah.
Twinsies.
I know.
It was like light pink, and I think it had silver hardware.
I think hers did too. We might have had the same casket.
I doubt they make
a lot of pink caskets.
Yeah.
We probably had the same pink casket. She already had her burial plot, and she's in the same cemetery as my dad, her brother, my Uncle Sonny, and eventually my mom will be there. Because my mom has her plot. Everything's already paid for right beside my dad's. I know when I go back up to North Carolina for Christmas, we'll change out everyone's arrangements for Christmas. We went to the craft store and I bought and I arranged a thing for her last year. But yeah, it was, in so many ways, it just doesn't feel right. Even though your grandparent dying before you, of course, is the natural order. Saying goodbye to someone who's been there since the day of your birth.
Like, there's moments where I will be like, my mom is really dead. And then there's moments where it feels like I'm fully aware she was here. But then there's moments when it's like, well, was she? If she's dead, was she really ever here? And I don't know if that's just like me, like my brain like getting morbid or dark about it.
I have kind of similar or parallel to that, where because I haven't lived at home since I was 18. College, living in the dorms, living back during the summer. And then since I was 18, I've been either in dorms, apartments, etc. And then moving to Atlanta, maybe going up to North Carolina once or twice a year. But then they used to come down a lot more until honestly just far too difficult with Mama with her Alzheimer's and it's getting hard to walk. I remember the last time before you and I were roommates, I think the last time, I don't think Mama ever came down when we lived together. No, my mom did. In the apartment was a 4. We lived on the second floor. It was like 14 steps, and it was so hard. And my mom was a nervous wreck getting her up and down those stairs. I remember her being like, I think this is the last time that I just can. My friends Steven and Anastasia, they got to meet Mama. This outdoor jazz concert, we had like some little snacky snacks, little picnic thing. And she was definitely at the point like where it's obvious that she has Alzheimer's because repetition of questions and stuff like that. 2 or 3 weeks ago, Steven and I were talking and he brought up that day. He's like, Anastasia and I were just talking about this the other day. It's like, man, your grandma loved you. And it's true. I was truly her pride and joy, her only grandchild. That's something they don't really talk about so much either. Maybe one of the drawbacks of being only children is that we don't have a sibling that we can share the grief with. I was her only grandson, so all of her love was so focused on me and poured out on me. I think it's difficult for me in some ways. As painful as this was for me, I can only imagine the exponentially deeper grief it is for her. 19 years apart. Are they mother-daughter or are they sisters? It's kind of yes.
Both.
It really is in so many ways because, that young, my mom watched Mama grow up as Mama was raising my mom, Is that strange dynamic? I've always said that my mom and grandma really saved each other from my grandfather because I don't know if either one of them would have survived without the other one to be their rock. There's a reason my grandma only had one child because she's like she wanted more than one kid. There's nothing she wanted more than to have multiple children, but she got pregnant so early on in that marriage, and then once she realized what that thing she married, she was like, I cannot bring another child into this, and she was so afraid of him. That's why she stayed married. He would threaten to kill her.
My grandmother went through something very similar.
And it's that fear that kept her in it. But, they were married 32 years, and our preacher, Baptist preacher now, the only person he's ever told to get a divorce. If a Baptist preacher tells you to get a divorce, it's bad. She was so scared of him. I always remember her telling the story after her father died, and she wanted to be with Gigi. He forbade her from going over to her mother's house. And he said, if you leave, don't even come back. And she said, I won't. And she left.
And is that how it ended?
She said her love for her mom was so strong, it overcame her fear of him. I've seen it so many times since I first saw it. You know what they say about grief is the price we pay for love. And the grief that you feel is the proof that the love was there.
I had the epiphany the other day that if the love is unconditional, the grief is too. And that kind of sucked. But I don't foresee it going anywhere. I think it will be easier.
I remember someone talking about grief as, think about having a really big ball in a box, and every time that ball hits the walls, it hurts. But over time, the ball slowly gets smaller as time goes on. It still hits the walls, but not as often. I remember hearing that and I was like, that's a really good analogy. The ball never disappears, but it does shrink over time. I couldn't imagine anyone who loves another person wishing for perpetual grief. Perhaps the best way to honor them is to live and to love. I do think about her looking down and smiling. Sometimes when I think about her, sometimes it's great sorrow for the loss. Sometimes my heart becomes full as I remember just how much she loved me. And sometimes that feeling of pain or that feeling of emptiness is replaced with or coupled with a feeling of warmth, which I don't know if that makes it easier or harder. All we can do is cherish their memories and continue to move forward, because even though our world may have stopped for a moment, time never does. Do you stand still and get lost, or do you carry this and move forward? And that's the choice we all make. And I think one honors them more than the other.
I love you.
I love you.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And sharing your story. I learned a lot of things about you talked about.
Yeah.
And we lived together for 3 years.
We did.
So I'm grateful for you.
Likewise.
Thank you so much for watching Lost and Found. I really hope that this episode resonated with you. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe below. There will be new episodes every Friday, and grief is fucking hard, and you don't have to do it alone. And I love you, and I hope I see you next time.